Greetings everyone, and welcome to Euroscope Conversations, the very first edition of our new interview series under the Euroscope Telescope Global Eye Intelligence. This series aims to bring experts and practitioners together to explore key ideas shaping Europe and its global connections. The topic for today's conversation is risk, strategy, and opportunity across the Europe-India corridor. So many people tend to underestimate or overlook the field of risk analysis. Yet it's one of the most important areas influencing how decisions are even made in business, policy, international relations, etc. So through these areas, we want to understand what risk really means in practice and how it connects with strategy and opportunity in an increasingly uncertain world. And to begin this journey, we couldn't have asked for a better guest. So today we have with us Mr. Ashdod, a distinguished expert in intelligence, due diligence, and cross-border strategy. He has guided clients across Europe and India, helping them navigate complex challenges such as anti-money laundering, fraud, corruption, counterfeiting, etc. He also leads to key initiatives, KYC Anonymous, which focuses on advanced due diligence and risk management, and Tollstrat, which tracks opportunities and strategic trends across Europe, India corridor. So, with over 20 years of experience, including roles with PwC, two New York-based consultancies, and as director of communications at a leading European industry lobby group. He brings both analytical depth and first-hand insight into how global risk and strategy connects. So, welcome you as both to this interesting session. So, first of all, what a great portfolio. I've been following your work for quite some time. I mean, through our group pages, to be honest. And honestly, I didn't think twice before reaching out to invite you for this session. It's a real privilege to have you with us today. So, yeah, in our conversation, we will touch upon several key themes like risk, due diligence, strategy, opportunity, policy, geopolitics, etc. All within this changing Europe-India context. Okay, I will ask a couple of quick warm-up questions just before to start lunch. So you run KYC and Tollstrat, right? So how do those two business differ? I mean, KYC does deep checks on counterparties while Tollstrat helps plan market entry. So how do those two business differ?
All right. Both are actually opportunistic plays. I've sort of, let's say, inherited them over a lifetime. As you've gone over my career, I've done different things. I started at a very interesting job with PwC, reporting to the managing partner for Europe. All my work was basically the areas PwC was afraid to do internally. They gave it to me. I was responsible for their first study on a law firm to acquire, which was a multidisciplinary partnership concept that they were thinking about at that time. They had a lot of issues. The oil industry was a very big client for PW, as it wasn't yet merged with Coopers and Lybrand. But they also had issues with understanding what was going on with environmental lobbying. So I've had a sort of a dual approach between the opportunity and risk side right from the beginning. I did, different stages of it. I've also worked, as you said, in a very influential European lobby group, the European Pharmaceutical Industry Federation, FPA, where I was their director of communications at the time the single market formed. Now, this is very interesting because once again, there is this dialectic between Europe versus the member states. And it still is something which very few people don't understand today, that much of the, opportunity in Europe lies by understanding the difference between European Union Europe and member state Europe. and
Yeah.
Brussels bubble Europe, which is full of people who are a bit like Lutyens Delhi in India. I come from that Delhi too. I don't speak any Indian language other than English, so I come from that old kind of India, which has gone. I see a new India. Unfortunately, the Brussels bubble is very much like Lutyens India. It has very little connections with down on the ground people. Interestingly, I have a lot of connections on both sides, so I get to see Europe from multiple angles, and that was one more sort of drift that I had in my own career. The third area, of course, was I worked for a think tank, which is a very influential think tank called the Center, where I did a lot of work with India and China. But I mean, one day I was with Kasturi Rangan, the chairman of the Indian Space Research Organization, introducing him to his European counterparts. Another day it would be Praneeth Kaur, Maharani of Patiala, former Indian Foreign Minister of State, coming. So there was always this dialectic, not a straight line job with what you see is what you get and where you aim directly. I was always used to looking at two sides of every equation. And I think at this moment, if you look at I2 Strat, what I do is I come from a very old India. I had 6 direct members of the IAS in my family, in my immediate family. My grandfather was a civil servant and he was district magistrate of Cuttack in World War II, so you can understand which side I've seen. At the same time, his sister-in-law was a founder of the Congress Party and very close to Mahatma Gandhi. So we had the two elements always in our own immediate family. I had a governor of Gujarat and an Indian industry minister in my family, but I also had labor union people. So I've seen that, and what I do for European clients, and that I don't advertise very much, but it's reference business, and that's what I2 Strat does, is it takes a long-term view on where India is coming from and where it's going. The kind of clients I have there are companies like the biggest one I had as far as duration and depth of project was Michelin, which is, by the way, one of the toughest companies in Europe as far as access is concerned. But it was very interesting because they had already hired a Big Four consultant and they changed a lot of their advice after working 6 months with me, principally because I added in what would then become the KYC side, which was to look at all the troubles they could get. The point is we have two kinds of consultants in the world. One looks at opportunity, one looks at risk. I have instinctively sensed that the two have to be handled together for something very important. If you handle the risk correctly, you not only insure yourself, but you can aim higher for the bigger opportunity. Now, let me tell you, most of the Indian companies that have come here, and there are no more mythologies about it. I think groups like Tata overpaid money. They paid too much for Chorus. I don't know what exactly the Jaguar acquisition has really meant. If you look at Chinese acquisitions, India has $250 billion invested overseas. China does about that every year. The Chinese fly in the marrow of the system. They pick up things which connect to each other. They don't do opportunity shopping. You know why? Because they are analyzing the risk all the time. They're looking at political risk. They're not looking at low-hanging fruit. They're not looking at only their balance sheet. They're looking at the whole picture, economic, political, etc. And so the connections I have between the two are it's not all clients. There's a lot of clients who are purely interested in due diligence. I have people who have been vice chairmen of banks. I have a person who went on to was CEO of an Indian bank who has been my client. There it's very focused. They have issues, very single focused issues which are involving European things they cannot understand. I'll tell you why, because you're a young Indian. My granduncle was governor of Bihar. I've seen Bihar very closely. My father was a vice chancellor there. My granduncle was governor. I know a lot of people from Bihar, including a friend from college who went on to become the chief of police. She was the inspector general of police. Europe can be more corrupt than India at its deepest. There's a difference, and this is very important to understand because there are lots of people who get into trouble because they automatically assume what you see is what you get. When trouble happens in Europe, and I specialize in this, I've done hundreds of projects with corrupt judges, with kickbacks from ministers. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, Indian clients are very rare. I think they do their homework so far. They do their due diligence for a simple reason, Kevin. It is because so far Indian companies are dealing with friends, friends of family, and family of friends. That's the network at which Indian business in Europe has so far been pushed. Then you have the professional classes, the guys who come to work here and they start up different things. The problem comes in the next stage. I would say 95% of my client base in KYC are Europeans themselves who have trouble in Europe. So they are one step further. When I combine my two, the I2 Strat and KYC, and that happened ironically for Americans particularly, they want both sides. They want to see what exactly is an opportunity and why that opportunity has another side, a Janus space side, which is a risk, and how you mitigate the two together. That's the sort of thing I do increasingly for high net worth individuals, for small funds. They want to see all sides, particularly because today's world is one of, as you said, it's one of uncertainty. It's very difficult to say how long is the World Trade Organization going to last in its present form. What is the World Health Organization's mandate going to be in 10 years from now? So suppose you want to do clinical trials under WHO GMP. Do you want to make sure that you are also looking at what are the other alternative models that can allow you to bring into play in different markets? So that's the sort of general idea where the two play together.
Yeah, that's a quite interesting introduction. And so saying about this Europe, see when European firms plan their entry into India today, now that European Union free trade agreement is being negotiated, and EU green rules like the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So such things are changing the market access. So what do you think are the key risk areas they most commonly miss? Say, I think last year some Indian steel exporters are repricing and rethinking their EU market access just because that carbon border adjustment scheme charged for their embedded emissions on imports, which
Right.
affected their competitiveness and origin sourcing decisions. So, what do you think are
All
some
right.
key risk
Two bits
areas?
here. Firstly, CBAM, as I call it, could have been seen from 2005, 2006. You have to understand, there was a very interesting sociologist in Germany who wrote a book on the life of the Social Democratic Party. It's very interesting because it represents to me, Michiels, his name was, talked about how institutions perpetuate themselves. Right now, if you look at the European Union, it started as the European Common Market. It then, at the Maastricht Treaty, became the European Union. At the Lisbon Treaty, it became the European Political and Military Union. Right?
Yeah.
So you can easily see, and I had a little unfair advantage because I was responsible for putting the first really serious 7 amendments into the EU communication for a strategic partnership with India. I did it on my own account as a personal lobbyist for India, if you will, along with some friends from the UK. You can predict CBAM was coming. Right now, if you're looking at carbon border adjustment mechanisms, what is the most important area you should be looking at is not EU-India. You should be looking at what is the outlook for CBAM after the United States starts interfering with Europe. Because there are lots of other angles of play out here. And as you know, you have the concept of reciprocity, but you also have the concept of you cannot have unilateral preferential advantage. Now, that is the direction right now where CBAM is going. 1. 2 is, as I say, I wouldn't worry so much about CBAM and post-Trump CBAM as what will happen. And by the way, if you want, type Trump and my name and the globalist, and you'll see in 2016, H1B, Trump, WTO, all are written there. That was 10 years ago. It's not because I'm some kind of a soothsayer. But if you look for signs, you can find them. If you go looking for signs, you find them. And today's European Union, you have to look at, it is desperately in search of a mission in a post-Trump world order which wasn't factored in by itself. So there are two sides here. Environmental agendas, they've been there since ever. Post-Trump adjustments to the environmental agenda, how are they likely to shape up? That's something that has to be put into place. And that has to be put into place by very, very deep analysis of who is behind which. members of the European Parliament, which members of which member states are at the moment on the pro-CBAM side? Who are against it? How is the threat of relocation outside going to impact upon, let's say, the French elections? Because, steel, as it happens, is very interesting because both ArcelorMittal and Chorus, the two biggest steel companies in Europe, potentially now Jindal taking over, as you know, Thyssen. There is an Indian factor very much there, which will have very serious implications as far as the lobby groups are concerned as well. So looking at this means you have to start looking ahead, look across the board, try to see in areas where there are potential pressure points that can be enhanced, that can be, much more useful than they appear to be because of their weight. You can have local government guys, you can have people like this who are part and parcel of your bigger mechanism to play on. So that is something, the two things you have to do. The problem with India is we have watched this for 40 years, and I've watched China very closely. I wrote a memo for Sushma Swaraj. It was commissioned, by the way, by two top Kerala origin IAS officers, both who were secretaries to government in Delhi, on what China was doing in Europe. And this was written in 2012. It may be worth looking at it. Everything I said has come out true for China. Everything I urged India to do has not been done. And the problem is, we're doing okay. We could be doing much better. And CBAM is a very good example. CBAM is many things, depending on when you look at it, from where you look at it, how you look at it. And because of India's special position in the steel industry, that has a particular degree of bias. But unless you take all this together, you do not get the opportunity because the risk factor has changed. Is that clear?
Yeah. So just adding China makes the picture much more sharper. Because yes, the European Union is not just reacting to the US itself, it's also caught in the tricky recalibration with Egypt too. So after years of deep economic ties, Europe's now trying to de-risk without fully decoupling. Which is easier said than to be done, especially for countries like I think Germany and France, whose industries rely heavily on Chinese supply chains. This CBIM, critical raw material sourcing, all these are some spaces where I think EU's balancing act between the US and China gets exposed.
Completely. But again, go a little back. You talked of two very important and very interesting companies, France and Germany. One very good way to look at the EU when it became the EU as opposed to the EC was to look at the grand bargain. Remember, this all happened at the same time when the Soviet Union was on its way out, the Berlin Wall was moving. And France and Germany, as I say, if you want to study the Jammu and Kashmir problem in India, come and learn it from Alsace-Lorraine. I don't see why people from JNU don't come and spend a time talking and looking at what exactly happened in terms of the Alsace-Lorraine between France and Germany and where France and Germany are today. Because the grand bargain, and this is very important, there was the EU in 92. There was the collapse of the Soviet Union from 90 to 95 before all this Yugoslav drama began, which was also, by the way, it was a EU-NATO exercise for self-perpetuation. But if you look at it, you'll see there was a big bargain between France and Germany. And the bargain was Germany will reconfigure the European middle-sized companies. In Germany, you have the Mittelstand. I have a lot of clients in the Mittelstand, the people who produce the small, highly specialized engineering companies who are practical monopolies globally. Unfortunately, 70% of them are either controlled or totally dependent on China today, right? But what has happened by virtue of the grand bargain with France, take a case study, and I think this is what our business schools should do. They should study all the politics of globalization in European eyes. Take a company in Spain like SEAT. It was an automotive company. It is an automotive company. It belongs to Volkswagen. What happened is the Germans, right? When they took over SEAT via Volkswagen, the entire tier 2, tier 3, in Spain it was all politically and geographically located in an area called Murcia, south of Valencia. All of them were told, we're going with Skoda. Skoda, by the way, is one of the oldest car companies in the world, and like much in the Czech Republic, it's not very well known. They make very great stuff. They were engineering very advanced. It went to Skoda, but then it went to China. Something exactly the same is happening now, and I don't know if people in India are watching when we are talking about this Airbus plane we are buying to replace the
Yeah.
AN-32, whatever it is. The point of the matter is the Spanish components down the road will have to move somewhere. Are they moving to China or are they moving to India? And that was the grand bargain that the French had with the China. You know, with the Germans, the French, they are very different in industrial structure. Their middle-sized industry is very small. They have what they call national champions. Companies like Group Bull, which are older than dinosaurs in terms of evolutionary biology. I don't know why they existed for so long. The Germans had the middle mass. The question was, who would go to China and who would get what in return? And France got European agriculture, it got the agro-processing. There's a lot of bargains there, which have to be understood to be able to see what is going on right now for an Indian company in relation to what's going on in Europe. I mean, it's extremely detailed and complex, but the big lines are very, very obvious. And I think that has to be played.
Yeah, that's an intriguing example. I too follow this automobile field. I am a bit of an automobile enthusiast. So yeah, that Seat case really captures the complexity of what you call the grand bargain. Uh, so I think
And
just flipping
automotive,
the coin.
sorry, Kevin, I mean, automotive, you can take two separate examples. Take KTM Bajaj in Austria on one side, and take Apollo Vredestein. Vredestein is a high performance race car tire, well, more or less. KTM is a motorbike which had its own history. And in the meanwhile, you have TVS and BMW who are wandering around in the middle. Now, when you look at this and then you start looking, why did Mahindra go wrong with Sangyong? You know why? They didn't have a European strategy. That's all. It's that simple. Mahindra is great in America because he has a tractor base.
Yes.
Europe's tractor base is Chinese. So, you get all these sorts of plays. As you give the auto example, I'm giving you a few examples here.
Okay, so just flipping the coin. When Indian firms expand into Europe, so given evolving EU rules like GDPR, the data protection, such things. So, what practical risk do they most often underestimate? Like
Cost.
take just some recent example, Soho. Our own ministers are promoting them. All central government employees are replacing their Google accounts with Soho. So Soho expanded and placed their EU data centers. Also altered their data transfer architecture to comply with this GDPR stuff. So what do you think are some practical risks to these guys
GDPR's
often?
risk for an Indian company is much less than its cost. The cost is the most important thing. You have to be compliant because it's a certification process that is important. GDPR prosecutions is practically next to negligible. It's a totally different story. But how do you take it into account? And which sector is it important? Which sector is it sensitive? And obviously the big thing that is going on right now with all the it's very interesting you mentioned Zoll because you've seen Google flying in very quickly to start its data center now. But these are all playoffs, mutual playoffs. And if you notice, the Europeans produce GDPR, but they haven't done very much in the other sense of producing what are the players on the world playing field right now, whether it's in AI, whether it's in Google, who have their own India angle, correct? What is important here is on the GDPR side, it's very important to see what are the potential trouble spots by missing compliance. That is the most important thing. And obviously, many small organizations don't care. The big organizations are coming in. What is happening? Of course, they're bringing in their practices from India, from the consulting companies, the big four, who bring their teams in who know the GDPR story. I don't see that ever becoming a problem for the bigger companies. For the smaller companies, yes. For the smaller companies, let's take a good example. I did a very interesting project and it taught me a lot more than it should have. I did the global clinical trial site selection for a very sensitive psychotropic drug against schizophrenia for Eli Lilly in 45 countries, including India, China, and a lot of Europe. Now, US was the only one out. What I noticed out there was very interesting is how much closer the Indian mindset is to the Europeans than either is to China. But the Europeans prefer China because it's different, because it's easier. They find India as complex as themselves. Now, when you're talking of GDPR, and I'm talking about who should be alert here, just by virtue of taking that logic a little further, I would say the small Indian pharma company, the small Indian healthcare consultant, the guy today who is doing, because everybody's heavy into AI. AI is trained. Suppose you want to do, there were these beautiful machine learning algorithms which got nowhere. Today they've jumped one step further and we're waiting for AI. But all the clinically relevant data is there in India because, we have the genetic diversity like nobody. We have a very high level of exposure. Well, I mean, in terms of just, let's say generally, obviously you will find exceptions, but in terms of what, ethnic factors and things come in very important in terms of clinical trials when you're making files for submission. But in terms of the amount, and I did this for an investor who was investing in medical imaging in a very small niche area, it was fascinating to see that Indian MRI systems work 24 hours. The throughput per machine is so much higher than here that if you start then doing the demographics, you see, well, if you want to do analysis of biomarkers on tumors, I mean, you have to do it in India to build the first data set before you come here. So there, if you do not take care of GDPR at the bottom level, remember, these are all continuous. You start at the bottom of the barrel. You have to make sure that every link in the chain, that the accountability is there. Now, I'm giving you a small example in healthcare. Their GDPR will be very important. If you're in defense, if you're producing some aerospace component, that's a different story. Then I don't think you have to worry too much about GDPR. There are other things which are coming in Europe, which are going to be very important.
Okay, so not just GDPR. What do you think about other things? There are Digital Service Act and AI Act in EU. Do they play a role in this thing, or is
Yes.
it all about GDPR?
They will play a role. Just remember something. It's a good way to look at it is these acts, they do two things. Europeans have a very powerful superego in Freudian senses. They like to think of themselves as how others think of them. They want to see how they are looked at, not what they think of themselves. All right. The United States is a very, how would I say, it's a very id player. It plays on basic instinct. It's raw. It looks for tomorrow's opportunity. It's willing to sacrifice today for tomorrow. The Chinese for day after tomorrow. The Europeans are all the time concerned about yesterday. This is where heritage, where tradition, where value comes in as the most primordially important factor. Now, when you take a thing like this into equation and you start looking further, you start understanding a lot of this is for self-image. AI is changing. If you look at IT, you look at the history of technology, can you name me 3 superb European companies in IT? You're too young. You're too young. In the workshops I used to hold for the European Commission, I used to be talking one day with their EU commissioner, was on the same panel as me in Lisbon. Another time I was here in workshops, a lot with the DG RT&D. That time Nokia was everything. Where is Nokia today? That time Skype was everything. Where is Skype today? And do you know what is very interesting? Trace Nokia. What was Nokia? Nokia was a design company, pretty good. Who was providing Nokia with its engines for growth? It was Wipro in Bangalore.
Oh, yes.
The minute Wipro bought Saraware, a Finnish component design company, it was over for Nokia in terms of the ability with which they could drive. It's not just, you're not just producing pretty faces in technology. Apple showed that is possible, but Apple also has a hardcore engine. And what happened to Skype? Where did that go? It went to Microsoft. How did it go to Microsoft? By a guy from my old college, by the way, who bought it and took it to Luxembourg, a Bitspilani guy. I have traced that trajectory for multiple Europeans. And what I see is they're more interested in what it gives in the way of the feeling which others might have. And if you take things like futuristic digital services, futuristic AI, compare it. I'll tell you where to compare it. Put some people onto it. Look at bioethics.
Okay.
Now, if you want reality, the beauty is 10, 15 years ago, 25 years ago, you had every commission on bioethics because you had the whole thing with test tube babies, you had et cetera, et cetera. Today, by the way, there is no country in the world easier to get euthanasia than Belgium. Day before yesterday, a Belgian girl of 25 was euthanized. You know what? Because she was depressed. So 25 years ago, they can talk endlessly about bioethics, standards, rules. Why? Because people are looking at you and you want to look better. You want your superego to be massaged. But when it comes down to the brass tacks, they'll do everything provided no one else is looking. No one, Indians, imagine if India euthanized a 17-year-old or a 20-year-old. Well, this is the second one. And it's very interesting for you to learn that there was another girl getting ready, young girl, ready for permission. This is all the post-COVID generation, by the way. And a particular treatment which had not been approved was tested and her depression went. Now imagine if that treatment had not been there. Now do you see the difficulty between legislation and reality and the speed to market? So when you look at these things, keep an eye on these acts. They are much more on image. Let's say the cost of non-compliance is much higher than the risk of it. 1. 2, keeping attention, and I tell you this because I've, right from the CII days, I've seen them. They were all friends of mine who used to come here and have their first good beer in Belgium, Lots of people in the 90s. It's not important to know everything in detail, but unless you feel the European system, it's very easy to miss the really big opportunities. And that there are some people who have taken those really big opportunities, and those who have done their homework. And I think that means opportunity and risk. Because there are plenty of examples of companies. I can name you companies from the Tapa Group. I can name you Sylvania. Everything was done wrongly because they don't see the cultural dynamics. They don't see the European self-image, the European thought about Europeans. All these things, how they play into each other, have to be factored in. And I think with legislation that is coming tomorrow, think about legislation which was there day before yesterday, where did it go to, and try and benchmark it and to make impact assessments. Listen. But sensitive areas today, defense, healthcare, and their applications in technology, I think it's very important to do homework. I'll tell you, it's not confidential. I had a client, he was a South European company. His partner had built a head-up display for a drone. Tested it. The partner's wife's new husband had it to show. They just did a show to someone who was interested in an exhibition who came by to look at it later. That one guy was an Iranian. This chap landed up in the United States. He was picked up by Department of Homeland Security and shoved inside. Now that sort of stuff, today's particular movement in the 1970s and 80s, you had something called COCOM, which was where the dual-use supply chain ends. When you're now taking AI, when you're taking stuff like, invisible technology, borderless finance, you and I are talking across space and time across space with nothing. How do you make sure that you're fulfilling the key requirements? That is very important in Europe, because when the system here functions as a let's prove it case, there's no question that it'll deliver for its own interests and for its own requirements. Look at Nirav Modi. Nirav Modi? I look at Mehul Chokshi. But I'll tell you, you're looking at Europe. Mehul Chokshi had a report on the conditions in Tihar jail or wherever he was going.
Yes.
It's very funny. They're Indian journalists. They're not thinking maybe it's good to come to a Belgian prison and look how many times the Belgians have been condemned for overcrowding. Do you know the Belgians are opening prisons in Albania because they need to put paper? They've been, I don't know how many times the European Court of Human Rights has taken, but we will dutifully report about male chocks. See, I think that is the kind of thing. Start looking a little closer at this continent. It's not what it seems necessarily. And that same thing goes with AI, etc.
So would you say that your area called Europe superego is actually holding back its partnerships, especially with countries like India, by making the collaboration feel one-sided? See, for instance, in places like Germany, where regulatory and cultural rigidity still make it tough for Indian companies to enter. So isn't that moral assertiveness becoming a something like a competitive disadvantage?
Very good question. Very good question. It has been there. If you look, I gave you the examples of IT. Look
Yeah.
at how they spend a lot of time trying to do nearshoring. Then they talked of reshoring. I've written an article for Yale University Center of Globalizations on the French fight against the 21st century. It was about how France cross-subsidized failing companies to pick up better future ones, where it doesn't have money for the future, but is willing to take up the past. Actually, that would be a very good article to look at. But look at nearshoring. So they wanted anything but India, because India threatens them for a variety of reasons, okay? It's its size. It's its history. Hey, no one went to India. I mean, you come from Kerala. You know about the Varnas of Travancore. There's a whole history behind it, which is very different from what is the Travancore. C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, the
Yeah,
Ivan's grandson, was my very, very close friend. So I know a lot of it from inside. What I'm saying is the discovery process of the European in India versus the Indian discovery of the European in India. These two channels are now going to start colliding. So if you look at Europeans, and I'll write this for you, and I know them very well. I mean, I'll tell you, between you and me, it's a very nice example. There's sometimes 6-8 months where I don't see an Indian because I don't work with Indian people. I'm married to a European for the last 35 years. Most of my friends are Europeans, but I have a very wide variety of friends. I think about Europe. Sometimes I'm sitting with bank chiefs. Same day in the evening, I can be sitting with a cop, and later in the night going to a gun club where I'm meeting people who are former soldiers. All of those things give resonance on what is Europe, what drives it. You see? Now, when you take that, one thing you see, the European, if you can define it, some of them who have not yet met me, will always prefer the second best here rather than the best in India. They are getting ready now to accept the best in China, because China has done a different job from India. China has a very different way. The Indian Foreign Service, my sister belonged to it, so I know it very well. It's a very small foreign service, and I know what diplomats here do. They don't do what the Chinese diplomats do. The Chinese diplomats come to learn what are the weak spots of these countries. You see, there are two ways to dialogue with people who will not be willing to take the risk of jumping into the dark for the best, but we're happy to keep what's at home for the second best. You need to study what is weak. You need to study where they're failing and address that. Not give them opportunities based on some Harvard Business School argument. That won't work in Europe. So what works here is you have to first have the waiting period where they go through the second best, or try and find out a place where the second best is failing. Now, let me give you a very clean example. I put it up on LinkedIn. Europe faces a near catastrophic shortage of medicines.
medicines.
Oh, it's all over. I mean, I've put up, you can see the thing. Now, India, some of the medicines which are in chronic shortage here, they keep coming back. I'm trying to do something in that area, so that's for an investor. But let me say that you see the shortage of medicines here. You can find in India the same medicine, 25 varieties of it, it's the same one, for price differentials between 300 and 500% or lower. Now, we're looking at a market. This is supposed to be a world of free trade, a world where, neoliberal principles that what is produced efficiently is going to win over what is protected inefficiently. Do you know that officially the European Union's plan to they want to bring back medicines production. God help them. I mean, medicines production isn't the easiest thing in the world. And unfortunately, today's, let's say what they call the hospital formulary, I mean, they have six, 700 different things which are called essential medicines. By the time you put them out to produce them, in the costing structure here, with the overhead of labor unions, extra baggage, rules, regulations, I mean, you're talking of 10 years. And you're talking of something a bit like Group Bull in France. So guess what the next option is? They want to set it up in North Africa.
North
So,
Africa.
because it's more pliable. You know, you can push around Tunisia. You can't push around India, or not as easily. So what the opportunity here is what about the Indian company going and setting itself up as a Tunisian company? Now, funnily enough, there are Indian companies in America doing exactly that in East Europe with medicines. It's happening. But when it comes to outside Europe and the US, that arbitrage between Europe, India, and other parts of the world is not yet there. And if that can be pushed together, then you say, yeah, the question you asked is, would they rather lose an opportunity? Yes, but if the opportunity is packaged palatably, they will take it. The example, and I don't understand why they don't teach this, they should make every Indian business school student study what India can do is what Lakshmi Mittal did, not what Tata did. It's the total difference. That is where Lakshmi Mittal did a job, which is an industrial paradigm along the lines of Rockefeller or JP Morgan. He brought an offer which was impossible to refuse. By the time he did it, and by the way, I met the guy who was the CEO of Arcelor. He was the same, let's say, club as my business partner in France. The thing is, it was just it was a thing where there was no room to wriggle out. Now, that can be done. That can be done very well, but not by bringing delegations over and repeating the same thing, talking the same thing. You know what I mean? You have to begin looking deeper down into where the opportunities are. And I'll tell you, everything that involves demographics, that involves, quality of life differential. For instance, technologies that help elderly home care. They're importing, Kerala nurses are coming now to Belgium as well.
Yes, yeah.
And they did their homework. They did it correctly. They got a guy from here to be an agent. Instead of going to Kerala and studying how the Kerala market works and understanding the system in Kerala, it's a very sophisticated system, as you know. Its literacy is the same as here. They should have gone and sent someone. They know what did they do. They got a guy who billed both sides and is now in jail. Now, that is how it worked. In jail, I'm not joking. So what does that mean for an opportunity? Well, here you go. How do you get in? This is something maybe you should actually talk, because I've also met your government guys who have come on delegations to healthcare fund. Going shaking hands with people from here and saying, yeah, I do this, I'll give it to you at 7 cents instead of 30 cents. They won't be interested. It won't work. This is not the United States.
See, so regarding these talks on entering into a particular region or entering into another country, so with a national security screens, they are tightening in some European states. For example, I think last year, I believe, the Dutch government took control of a Chinese-owned chip maker called Nexperia. So regarding this,
it's just last week they've exercised the national security provision again, which is much more.
Yeah. So what do you think are some red flags in this Europe-India manufacturing and assembly deals?
Unlikely. We do not have the strategic threat profile for Europeans. In fact, that's our problem. See, the problem itself, and this is the irony, for India to be taken seriously, it needs to become a bit more of a threat, like the Chinese. Now, is that a good thing to do, bad thing to do? I don't know. But clearly this transactional trading spectrum, which Indians are very good at, they come to exhibitions, show some samples, give 20% less, discount, that won't work beyond a point. You see, we are not functioning at the optimal level that we need to. And I think there are so many examples. I mean, I'm happy to give people, I'm not exactly cheap, but I can give examples, and I'll give you one very nice one. Study Bosch. Robert Bosch is Europe's biggest IP factory. It's German. It's the company, they invented everything from the common, not invented everything, but the common rail diesel, which lifted the profile of a diesel engine from 40, 50 horsepower to 150 horsepower and changed the dynamics. It used a common rail. It was invented by Italian Fiat, but they couldn't do anything with it. They gave it to Bosch. Bosch is the largest patent filing instrument inside Europe. Now, I'll give you the inside story because it's in my book, which I wrote in 2004. Bosch had a problem to be eligible for bidding for United States Defense Department contracts. There was a pre-qualification process, which was called Capability Maturity Model, CMM. They needed a level 5. They did not have a level 5. In fact, at that time, most of the 100 companies which had level 5s were in India as Indian companies or as branches of American companies in India, So you had to go through that route. So then you had the problem with Bosch's unions. They did not want to exploit workers in India because there's the immediate feeling, we're doing, it comes out of it. There's lots of reasons here, sociocultural, historical. You ask them, well, if you don't want to exploit them by giving them a job that is there, what do you give them? You see? And you got to also, I'll send you a paper which is called Enduring an IT Eclipse. It gave the IT phenomenon, what I wrote about it again for Yale, the difference between low wage and low cost or low wage and high cost. That's the arbitrage. So what did in this case happen? Bosch's workers didn't want to go for fear of exploitation. They didn't want the IT company to go. So Bosch moved its engineering design. So instead of moving the middle and low end to India, to a facility from which it could have the CMM certification for the US, it moved its highest end facility because no one would notice or believe it possible. Within 2 years, Bosch was filing patents out of Pune. Its IT facility was in Bangalore. Now, that model today can be there for 10 companies, but they're not looking. The Indians have to start coming and looking here, And that means being sensitive to these things. I use these words freely. No one pays me for it or gets upset. But European superego, to understand it, is critical. Food products, same thing, sensitivity. Packaging, for instance, biopackaging. These sorts of areas, they're going to be tomorrow billion-dollar products. We have some advantages there. It's in our tradition. We have to also be able to, be proud about saying we have been eating on banana leaves, so let's make banana waste biopackaging materials, sort of stuff like this, and then try to see where the legislation is going, or try to have an influencer who can work to influence legislation. Because you have something called the European Parliament. I call it something because really nobody knows what it does. It's to address the democracy deficit of the European Union. It's basically, it's like going to Trivandrum and talking about the Andaman Nicobar Tribal Council as a part of democracy in India. It's so removed from most people's lives, but they do all the agenda formation. So they are where all the legislative lobby agendas come. Now, having a foothold there, profiling MPs, seeing who is likely to be interested in an India pitch in an industry, that's the sort of stuff, well, the Chinese have been doing it for 10, 15 years. So
I think you might have heard about that front shoring. When country front shoring, where countries uses their own friend, other friendly countries, their own allies to share manufacturing stuffs, their own raw materials, etc. So after the COVID pandemic and the Ukrainian shock, many buyers talk about this front shoring. Uh, so how do you think how ready is India today? Just taking as how ready is India today to act as a supply chain alternative
it's a
or
good
for
question.
critical
It's a
critical
great
components?
It's a great question you ask. You're not asking about Europe here, you're asking about India. And in some senses, India is the other side of the mirror. It too does not have its act in place. And the problem is, I'll tell you, for instance, in Belgium, I think it was in France during COVID, there was a huge issue about the cold storage facilities. You remember when the Pfizer vax came up first, there was the whole issue of storing it at minus 70 degrees. And, there was a whole issue. So there was a lot of issue about India's cold storage capacity. Now, as it happens, India's cold storage capacity is higher than China's. Did you know that? Because we have such a gigantic pharma industry. And Adani's facilities in Bombay alone are bigger than many, many, many countries there are now. So I'm just saying this is a number. But a debate proceeds forever about the supply of whether vaccines will work because of cold storage shortages. It was in the newspapers, etc., that India doesn't have cold storage. It will not be able to receive it. Now, the question is, whose job is it? Is it the embassy's job? Definitely. Is the embassy doing its job? Definitely not. I'm talking of the Indian embassy here. And that's, you can quote me on it. I know I would say at least 10 ambassadors personally. What I'm saying here is that the Indian side to get ready for Europe is very different than the Indian side getting ready for the US or for the international markets. I would say that a very good thing there, and that's happening under the surface. We benchmark ourselves sometimes when we are in a good mood against Singapore, but Dubai as a transit point for India's interface to Europe. Oh, there are plenty of possibilities in something like that because it's compact, it's easy to use, it's growing, it's looking for this role. The most crucial thing is rather than get, in Gujarat, you have all these big plans for a financial center, etc. God knows, India, 20 years, things work always. I mean, I had a car when I was a child, its number was I still remember the number plate, BRN17. There were less than 100 cars that time in Namkum, Bihar. So today I go and I say, those days, India was making 30,000 cars a week, cars, buses, trucks, jeeps. Today, it's doing that. It was doing that a year, 30,000. Today, it's doing this every week or twice a week. What is there? If we wait long enough, the thing is there. But as far as this relocation of the supply chain is concerned, for me, it will happen. It will happen under American auspices, not by Indians themselves to Europe. Definitely not to Europe. It'll be an Indo-American thing for a variety of reasons, because there are many Indian Americans who have the capacity to push a thing like this through. There are enough, interfaces already existing, but to be able to take the political risk of fractionating and front-ending a supply chain somewhere else for a European in a critical area, it's not going to happen. And that's why I say looking at Dubai, medicines looking at Tunisia, these are the ways Indians should be looking at. But the problem is we have such a huge market, no one is too bothered till
Too
now.
bothered. Yeah. So can we just put that IMEC, the India, Middle East, Europe corridor? So such discussion into this thing, like
Okay.
like
Well,
you said, Dubai
it's a
as a transit point.
big part of the
Uh,
forthcoming book I'm writing, because for me, the October 7 attacks are directly connected to it. The dates are
oh,
too close. You understand, Haifa port was taken over by Adani earlier that year. You understand,
understand.
Saudi Arabia was due the next month to have an Israeli plane fly over its airspace to where? To Mumbai. So who is behind it is very difficult to know. But IMEC will work only if India understands this is an American project to which it has to play junior partner. For India to try and equate itself with the United States on the same playing field as with the same level, forget Donald Trump. I mean, he's not going to have that. I mean, the big part of the showdown right now is exactly that. But IMEC is a strategic answer to China.
Mm,
And I believe that it requires very high level thinking from India on where it belongs in the global pecking order. You
oh,
see,
cool.
you're getting cut off. So, yes, I think it will happen. It is going to happen. I think the first thing we're going to notice is India backing out of Chabahar because it goes totally against the workings, although it was a part of the corridor. Part of it's one flank of the corridor. But right now, I believe there is a
Mm,
lot that is going to happen because the Trump model of managing conflict is to bring in
mm,
cross party investments into conflict zones. Oh, he's doing that. He's doing it in Azerbaijan and Armenia. He's bringing American companies to invest in Azerbaijani gas infrastructure in Armenia, a place to where the European Commission president has visited some 6 times to get Azerbaijani gas. It hasn't come. So
yeah,
these are
yeah.
the games that are played right now. It's happening in Bosnia. It's going to happen in
Mm,
Rwanda and Congo with minerals, conflict minerals. All these things involve a new model into which IMEC fits in, which will happen. And actually, it's a big part of my book. I'm working on a book right now. And the last part is it's very important because a lot of the due diligence that I do, I do extreme due diligence. So the stuff, when the lawyers give up, they come to me. Some of my project reports are like Robert Ludlum stories. It's a part of the way I work. North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. What is happening in India? And there have been enough warnings to India for this, not to India,
Mm.
but to Indian
Yeah.
companies who have ventured into things. I'm not going to name them, but there have been Indian companies that have gone into floriculture in Africa. There have been Indian companies that have gone in. They haven't taken account of the Aga Khan's influence in East Africa when they're investing in a renewable project. These sorts of games, when they happen, the
Mm.
problem is the price is extreme because there's one European entity which is called the Development Finance Institution, which needs very careful study because they can be very important friends and they can also be ruthless enemies because they have agendas. These were the former development finance, development aid arms of European governments. Like, for instance, you have Agence France de Développement, AFD. Today, there's a private equity investment arm called Propaco. They come from the same accounts. Their balance sheets are homologated into the same reporting format. Propaco
Mhm.
has a kitty of $8 billion to invest. AFD gives.
Yes.
Now, do you see the confluence between aid and investment as opposed to aid on its own going? And there's a lot of things happening in India. Unfortunately, once again, they made all kinds of wrong investments. I mean, I had a little interaction. I had an uncle who was head of SIDBI at that time. But so I didn't go with that project, but I saw exactly what had happened because I brought a top German guy, 22 patents in hydrogen fuel cells. He was a client. I brought him over, took him to every Indian company that mattered on a private basis. But what happened was that the European DFIs were investing in another angle to that play, but they're powerful. So if you look at SRE infrastructure today, or you look at infrastructure lease and financing, you will see the catalytic role these European organizations had. Now, the problem there is they are so big, they crowd out intelligent funding. That intelligent
Mhm.
funding, the only alternative source is the United States. And they're now getting ready for it because they're rebooting USA. They're not making it anymore a development fund. They're removing USAID from the equation to make it function much more as an investment bank, which the Europeans have been doing for a long time. Huh? I mean, if you look, unfortunately, that is a politically explosive, but if you look at a French water company's first contract in New Delhi, it is
Mhm.
very interesting. Its antecedents, its roots, who was involved, etc. But it was pumped through by a DFI who had the right political contact. So they play at this level. And where do they belong? Are they important for India? Yes. Are they indispensable for India as far as the IMEC goes? Absolutely important to know how much their interests work against India in Africa. I think India's interests in Africa are much closer to the United States, but I think it requires time for that to be understood.
Yeah, this African strategic collaboration is much overlooked. I mean, I even myself, I didn't even thought about speaking Africa in this session. Uh, and also, it's talking about this strategic partnership. How do you think how will European Union and Indian Indo-Pacific strategies and their approach to China and the Indo-Pacific, influence these defense adjacent trade, like and or join R&D programs over coming few years, like next till 2030. Like the EU strategy for cooperation in the Indo-Pacific and the increasing EU-India strategic dialogues. So they show growing political traction for cooperation and connectivity. So what do you think? How will EU and Indian Indo-Pacific strategies influence defense adjacent trade?
Right. There are models for that already in the Gulf. That in NAV4 and things, there's collaboration going on. In the Pacific, it's slightly different because if you're looking right now at what's going on in the Quad, you're already seeing you've seen how the United States has kicked out the French, firstly from Australia. They are downplaying, with the submarines deal. Their next step is the downplaying of the Quad itself. I think this whole concept of multilateralism is anathemical to Donald Trump. He prefers bilateral. He prefers the personal. It is not India, Indo-Pacific with Japan, Australia, and the United States and India. It's Modi and Trump, and how do they feel about the Indo-Pacific? This is very, very serious. I'm not making a funny thing here. Now, if you look at what's happening with the Quad, where is the Quad? It was all over the place right now. Why is it? Why is it sort of slipping out? And this is a question: can Europe substitute? Absolutely not. Europe, if India decides to join the Europeans and substituting it, it is fulfilling a European agenda because, India overtakes Germany in 2028 in GDP. Everyone is very happy. We're a 4 trillion economy. Well, China is a 18 trillion economy. But let's not get saying, India is not doing well. No, 4 to 18 is a very short distance if you get the politics right. And the problem is, why do you go through the 4 to 18? Well, China took exactly 12 to 15 years. The gap between India and China is exactly 15 years when you look at displacement, when you look at GDP shifts, because you don't look at absolute GDP or even real GDP. You look at when India displaces France, when it displaces UK. Now, the problem is the military shifts under the surface are way, way more, how would I say, catastrophic for the Europeans. Because for a variety of reasons, their integration of the militaries, and that's what the Ukraine crisis will, well, as far as they're concerned, hopefully achieve, is to bring about some semblance of coherence. Because, they've been trying this since the 1950s when the Americans basically shoved down the European defense community and put NATO in its place with, it's geopolitics after all. But the Franco-German brigade, I knew one of its commanders. It's not something which will work for a variety of reasons. But outside that, can India exercise with France? Yes. In the Pacific? Pacific has too many big other alternatives, not just China, but Japan's navy is also huge. So where do the French fit into the pecking order? On the other hand, if the Europeans come together, the thing is, it's very interesting. If you try and see the codes of conduct for interoperability at the European Union level, they're always at the lowest common denominator. They're still getting their act together. It's very nice when you take EU GDP, but it's very different when you start asking Eurozone Europe, Europe with the UK, Europe ex-UK member of the EU, what about non-Europe, what about candidates? When you start putting all these together, and you start looking at something very important. There's one more last point which you must note. The thing of decoupling from the United States to build their own defense industry is going to be a very tenuous exercise because of intellectual property. The American system, in fact, one of my first jobs, in fact, that was when I met Indian Air Marshal, former Air Marshal Michael McMahon. He was defense attaché in Paris. I was doing an analysis of, I think, 30 Air Force's midlife updates. So at that time, it was literally to look at the supply chains. Who made the ejector seat? Who made the head-up display? All the entire chain of command. And you know what? Already by that time, the Americans were integrated because they practically control. This is their industrial policy. It's the politics of the industrial policy. So to extricate that, put it together, and then go to the Pacific, it's totally unrealistic. I think what India has to do is figure out how it plays with the US and with Japan. And I would be very, very cautious of Australia and the UK because their agendas in the Pacific are not quite the same as it is.
Yeah, just a couple more questions before we wrap up. So like I said in the initial part, regarding the India EU FTA, there are something like 10 to 11 provisions already there, like the geographical indications, uh, such things. So what do you think is which provision do you prefer more? There are several things like GI, government supported initiatives, such things. So, which provision do you uh, prefer
It's
more?
early to say, because we don't know what final format they will thrash out compromises in. And I believe even an FTA, you remember an FTA is an instrument. It isn't how would I say, it isn't a vehicle. It is how it is used, what optimal proportions it is utilized, how many escape clauses, etc., etc. What is the politics of it? This is a long time it's been there for proof. I think what is important is a much higher degree of bonding between Europeans and Indians will give meat to these kinds of things. And at which level does it begin? It begins automatically at a people to people level. I think that is something which has to be extended alongside the FTA. The FTA should have a little thing along the lines also of what the Japanese, by the way, did. I used to work for their embassy when they had their massive conflicts with the Europeans over car exports in the 1980s. The thing is, they developed this thing of officials coming. So I proposed this to the EU myself, to a commissioner, that start getting Indian local government people, start getting them to interact with European counterparts, start telling who the other is. It's not just tourists, it's not just students. And finally, at one point, I did have 8 Indian MPs, very interesting ones, come to meet, and I arranged 8 European parliamentarians and people from this side to have a open door interaction. I moderated it, so I asked questions. I came from a library. My parents were both literature professors, and we had a library of 25,000 books. So there's very little I haven't read in European literature. So I could get my hands on how to bridge, to get the two sides to talk together. For instance, it was very interesting to be able to look at what was missing. What was missing is definitions. How do people see you and define you? This FTA thing, it's still a trade arrangement. What one needs is a much higher degree of collaboration in terms of where trade leads to. Trade has to lead to mutual prosperity and investment, not just transaction, because it then gets stranded. You get it? This
Yeah,
part, to be able to do, I think the work has to be done on a much, much deeper level. And both sides have to get involved. I mean, it's not for nothing that I'm saying that
yeah. From the Indian part, there has been very less work. If you look upon the articles from both the EU and Indian governments, there has been very less articles, very less information from our
completely
side.
where to really focus and concentrate, because the demographics are clear, but the demographics are frightening for the Europeans. We are 3.5 times their population. We are young, right? Anything we take will become inundated. Should they be starting thinking about where they stop? Where do they go to? It was how the Swiss used to handle immigration in the old days. It was called the shock absorber way. When it works, bring, otherwise. And that's why they concentrated on the neighboring countries. Now, all these things are politically incorrect. Nobody's looking at them. The problem is, if it clusters, if it comes into too concentrated areas, suddenly there is too much of a flare up. All those protective provisions then come in which case the spirit of the thing is destroyed completely. So I think, for instance, one of the questions is, why does Europe have the Vega rocket? I mean, it produces the Ariane. India uses the Ariane when payloads are higher than its capacity. It has been doing that from Ariane 4 to Ariane 5. Now, the GSLV is Ariane 4 plus. Why are they producing the Vega and spending $1 billion and it doesn't even work well? What is the point of that? Where is the problem coming from? These questions Indian parliamentarians should be asking, you see. I've talked to MPs from India, including one who's very bright. I used to take him on my motorcycle when he was young. Sometimes I wish I had dropped him because he doesn't think very much. He needs to be understanding that you got to talk. If you talk to people, you understand who they are. Now, let me tell you on a last note, Kevin, you bring an Indian here. Okay, you have a lot of people now who are staying here who seem to know Europe. They'll tell you about wine and whiskey and things. What they need to also understand is that last mile involves actually understanding who the common people here are. If you deal only with the bureaucrats and the civil servants and the diplomats and the businessmen, are you missing the people? Look at the European. When they go into the little villages, and maybe they get fixated on that. You get it? But their mind already has it. Do we know where? I made an official proposal to an Indian minister, a foreign minister, saying, when the ambassadors come, give them 1 day's average wage of the European country in question, leave them in the geographical center and tell them to find their way back by hitchhiking, borrowing money, taking food. They'll then understand the system. It's not difficult. I'll tell you how I learned about Europe, not only by marrying a European. I have German godchildren who trust me more than their own parents. I have my own footprint in this place. But how did I learn about Europe? It's on a motorcycle. I've done 350,000 kilometers of motorcycling. Unfortunately, I'll tell you something. I never met another Indian who rides a motorbike here because it is real immersion. You get inside, you meet people on the ground because people who are on a motorbike, they give you a totally different picture than what you're meeting at embassy.
Yeah. Yes.
Second
Yes.
thing, I think Indian embassy should be I'm going to send you that memo on economic diplomacy that I wrote for Shushma because it actually gives a thing on how do you invigorate Indian diplomacy? How do you make the ambassador deliver? What is he coming here for? How many press releases has he got? How many newspaper interviews has he given? Those metrics are used by the Japanese, the Chinese, the others. Yeah, they come, they want to put their kids here, have some party. And then my problem with the Indian embassies is over 15 years, I've seen the same people coming back for 15 years. Now I don't go because I see their bloody children coming back. So it's that same lot, a nucleus of 50 people. You're not connecting them to the system. That's why when COVID vaccines were given in India, Bharat Biotechs, which was the oldest vaccine technology, vaccines have different cycles of effectiveness. They have different profiles on how they function. Those guys who came with Covaxin here, they had mild COVID. Now, everybody knows that is a part of a vaccine profile. And by the way, I wrote the European Union's first industrial strategic policy document for vaccines when I was at FBA. It's another of the things I've done. I have a good copy of that. I worked alongside the current director of the European Medicines Agency at that time. What I'm saying here is that when it came, how is it that the students came with the vaccination and they were immediately not only quarantined, they were almost in trouble because they were symptomatic. Now, at that time, shouldn't our people have got the chance to explain to people that this isn't some fly-by-night vaccine company? It produced, after the first Belgian company, Bharat Biotech was the first to produce a recombinant vaccine for hepatitis B. We have Serum Institute of India, only then after it comes out, suddenly everybody realizes how big it is. But those angles of play are a part of the conversation that has to be carried out while you're looking at Europe, whether it's for trade, whether it's for investment, whether it's for transaction, because only then does it develop to its full potential. All right, I got to run, man, and it was nice talking to you. And keep in touch.
Indeed. Yeah,
Bye.
we'll keep in touch.
Okay.
Yeah. Just one more quick question. Which motorcycle did you used to
Oh,
have across?
well, I went on my honeymoon on a bike too. No, first I started, oh yeah, I had the only motorbike at Bits Pilani. Huh? I had a Yezdi in Bits Pilani in the 1970s, 1976, 78. Then I had an Enfield Bullet. Then in America, I had a Harley 888. Then I had the first super bike in Europe, the Honda 754. Then I had a
Oh, cool.
Suzuki RGSX, which was the one I went on my honeymoon with my wife, who was only 45 kilograms. So every time I changed gears, I used to see she was still behind because it's a powerful bike. After that, only BMWs. I had a very bad accident. I flew off my bike at a very high speed, that after that I couldn't walk, but I still took the bike and went to Spain. And when I came back, I was walking. But all the big bikes, 1100 plus. The last motorcycle I just stopped was a 1200 ST. But I've done
Yeah.
close to, I mean, overall, I've done almost 500,000 kilometers. And I'm going to send you today an article I wrote about what Europe looks like to an Indian motorcyclist, what the politics of Europe mean, because I'd written it just after the financial crisis that did. And you'll see what I mean when I say one needs to immerse to understand the continent's weaknesses, strengths, opportunities. It's built the modern age after all. No? So. Hey, you take care. I got to rush. Real pleasure chatting with you. Happy to do this whenever
Yeah.
we have time again. Huh?
Yeah, so thank you very much, sir. It was quite an enriching session. So since you are in a rush, I'm not in a mood
No,
to
we'll catch
say.
up again. I also want to know why you are going, because I think there are lots of things which have come to me as I speak to you, which could be probably looked at with a little more proximity
Yes,
on where this sort of information it is missing. Let me tell you that. Where is it
yeah.
Where is it usable? What are the things that are going on? Let's have another chat on that as soon as I'm off
Yeah,
right now, but once I'm back from a trip, I will get in touch. Okay.
yeah, sure, sir. We will be in touch. Okay, so in behalf of all the members of Global Intelligence, I
Thank
heartily thank you for being in the session, for
thank
your
you.
time.
Thank you. It was very interesting and illuminating, by the way, to talk to you. I'm very happy about the conversation. Okay. Take care and see you
Thank you,
soon. Huh?
sir. Thank you. See you
Bye.
soon. Bye. Yeah, bye.